The other day I posted a quote on my social media. It says that if we try to add anything man-made to the sacrifice on the cross, we are nullifying the work that Christ has done. And also in Isaiah 42:8 it says that His glory He will not give to another. And also I'd share another thing that I said, when a Christian uses the word cult, it's usually referring to a group or whatever that claims to have been rooted in Christianity, but it has deviated or abandoned the work of Christ or compromised on His person. So what am I saying that? It's because we have seen so much. It's just a lot going on. Just recently, I listened to a message on culture that was 51 minutes long, and the person that was saying that was giving the message only mentioned Christ one time, and he wasn't even as talking about his personality more of as an adjective. The guy was just implementing a lot of fear to his audience. Yeah, we also just want to put it out there that our loyalty is first with God, and then with men, especially the innocent. And yeah, we were saying all that. We want to as leaders to not influence with fear, but with boldness and courage and the Word of God. We want to ask leaders to not control people, but guide people and teach with again the Word of God. We want to encourage to teach morality, if you will, in the context of God. Outside of that, morality won't take you anywhere. It's best to, instead of teaching a person how to do everything right and whatnot, it's best to teach a person how to listen to God telling you what's right and what's wrong and what to do next. So yeah, let's now get to my wife's story. Thank you. Welcome to our podcast.
This is a space we've created with love, a place where real people can share their healing journeys without fear or shame. Through honest conversation and deep connection, we hope to reveal that no story is too messy or too far gone for God's grace. We're passionate about exposing cultural blind spots, sharing truth with compassion, and glorifying God as the ultimate healer. His love on the cross conquered all, and that changes everything.
Hello, everyone, and thank you again for visiting us. Today I'm excited because I might be learning some new things from my wife, and yes, it's her time for to tell her story. So, without saying too much more, I guess we just get right into it, right?
Sure.
This is my dear wife, Hannah, and I believe she's gonna stop at the time again where we met. So she's gonna tell as much as possible, and
As little time as possible.
until the time where we met. Yep.
Right. To start, I'd like to give a little context to a word you're going to hear me saying a lot. And I think it's important to clarify this word so that the rest of what I'm going to say makes sense. And that word is system. And I've been thinking a lot about the verse lately where it says, "We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, and so forth." And I believe included in that is systems, unhealthy man-made systems that do not leave place for Jesus and the Holy Spirit to work in our lives. So one word you're going to hear me saying a lot as I'm telling my story is system. By system, I'm not referring to a specific people group. So I'm not saying that this is the system which I'm talking about does not necessarily mean Mennonites. I love the Mennonites. There's so much beauty there. But what my passion is to fight against a system where Jesus is not first, and rather where we believe that we need a lot of man-made rules or guardrails, as they're often called, to keep us holy. The system which I will be talking about is a system based on fear. Fear of losing our salvation, of not being good enough, of not doing all the right things at all the right times to be good enough for God. This system is also very suspicious of beauty, especially feminine beauty, and sexualizes women. Um, People who are raised in this system are raised to see people first as bodies instead of souls and hearts. Just having been raised in this system, I still struggle to, um, when I see someone, the first thing that I've been programmed to see is what they're wearing or what they're not wearing. And that is one of the great downfalls of the system. Instead of looking into a person's eyes and seeing their heart, you're trained to judge them by what they're wearing, by what culture they come from, what color they are, how they look. And you kind of get stuck on that part and never get a whole lot deeper. So it's a system that turns people into bodies instead of into spiritual beings that God loves. And it really creates a barrier when you're trying to reach someone when you can't get past the outside. And we also, those of us who have been raised in that system, also tend to judge ourselves then on what we look like, because we're taught that our exterior is a mirror of the interior. So if you get the exterior right, that means the interior is fine, right? No, we'll get into that later. This system also does not trust Jesus completely for their salvation. They believe that Jesus has a big part in it, that he died on the cross to save us from our sins, but that now it's up to us to make sure we're good enough to keep that salvation and to do all the rules and all the right things, in order to stay saved. And what that looks like for most of us is church rules. We're handed a book of rules, that only if we do these, if only we do these rules, it's basically a blueprint to heaven. And it's very, very deceptively safe feeling, because our humanity, our carnality loves to have a list of rules to look at and say, if I just check mark off this list, then I'm right with God. Now I can go to heaven. And stepping outside of that for me was absolutely terrifying. And those of us who come from that specific system will have a whole army of people behind us telling us that we are headed straight for hell, because we are no longer checking off all the right check marks, like having your dress long enough, having the flowers small enough, combing your hair the right way, all the things. And it goes farther than just outside appearance, but that is a very big thing in the system. And as I said before, I think the system is focused on keeping people holy through external controls instead of leading them into a passionate relationship with a real Jesus that changes them from the inside out. So instead of teaching people how to drive, we're putting up guardrails, as we call them, along the road, so that even if in our humanity we would tend to drift to the side, the guardrail will smack us back. So we're going to put up all these rules along the road of life to keep us holy. And the Bible, I believe, teaches specifically against that, which I think Juan and I are hoping to do an episode on that later. So
Yeah.
we'll save that.
Right. I think that was well said, and I'll say all that I believe leads to, as one of our spiritual dad told us, Jason, that um, makes us live out of love for power instead of the power of love. And yeah, that's one tendency of our brokenness and in our humanity, to want to just have power over people and control, and yeah.
It's a system based almost entirely on fear and
Right.
control, not on love. Jesus' perfect love casts out fear. And I spent most of my life living in the kind of fear that I always felt like I needed to be doing something more. I was never quite good enough for God, wasn't able to quite do the church rules the way I was supposed to be doing them, or the way that one minister would explain them to me. Maybe another minister would explain them differently. And then I'm like, well, which minister do I go with? Like, because these church rules are handed to you as a blueprint to heaven, basically. And they don't believe you can be spiritually safe without them.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you didn't fit much.
It made life pretty hard for me.
Yeah, well, but if I think if you would have fit in all those boxes, you would have not looked or be interested in yeah dating me. So that was a good thing.
Yeah. And I can genuinely say I tried my dead level best to fit into those boxes.
Mm,
And when I actually made the decision to leave the system, I actually was able to leave with as much of my minister's blessing as possible because
yeah,
they said you did the rules, you did the
yeah,
things. Like,
and
we can't stop you from leaving.
even in our even in our early days, there was I noticed there were some things that yeah you don't have anymore. You have changed quite a bit, and I'm thankful to God. But there were some things that were quite rule based. Like you wanted me to have some rules and some regulations, and I was like, "What? What is this all about? This is not biblical necessarily." So
Turn you into Mennonite
Dominion,
instead of a Dominican.
yeah, right. That's pretty good. All right, so we should probably start.
Right.
Yeah.
One more thing with that verse about we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We don't wrestle against people. And as I tell my story, I have no desire to target any specific group or individual because very, very few times in my life have I met a truly evil hearted individual. Most of the people that played key parts in my story, parts that really ended up hurting me, were actually good hearted people controlled by a very evil system, a man made system, not of God, but of this world. And so, as I speak, I want to be very sensitive to the fact that, and I also want it to be clear to my audience here, that the people that I am referencing are very dear people to me. I love them so much, and I really don't believe they're bad people, but I believe that they are a part of a very deceptive system that creates a whole people group that looks so good and yet are so lost.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm not sure if this adds up much, but I think it was somebody close to you that said that the person said that they believe that they needed to rely on all this because they couldn't
On
trust.
all the rules.
Yeah, they couldn't trust on their own heart, and yeah, that kind of sad. But
Which goes back to a wrong interpretation of Jeremiah
right,
17, where it says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. That's speaking of a heart outside of Jesus. In fact, it's specifically speaking about a heart that trusts in a system.
mm-hmm.
But we're going to do an episode on that. So
we'll hope to do that for sure. So you were born in United States, I believe, right?
I was born in the United States.
Which
Yes, I'm
part?
very, very American.
Yeah.
So, before I get too much into me, I'd like to talk a little bit about my parents,
Mm.
and because their origin and background really affected my growing up years, of course. My dad was a twin, the oldest in his family. And unfortunately, as the oldest son in the family, um, he was he experienced the brunt of my grandfather's abuse. I know that a lot of his brothers did not experience the extent of getting beat up like he did. So he had a lot of wounds growing up that he never found healing for. As a young father, when he realized that he had been treated in ways that were wrong and he was seeking for healing, he did go to a minister at his church and shared a little bit of his story. And that minister said, "Don't you ever speak about this again." And so that was where it stopped. And that really breaks my heart for my dad because he experienced a lot of things that God never intended for him to experience. And when he reached out for healing, he was shut down. And that really affected how he was able to parent because, yeah, we don't want to copy our if we were parented in unhealthy ways, we don't want to copy that, but that's default unless we experience healing for that.
That is actually very, very sad to me to hear those things for sure. Just like it is for you, breaks your heart. And it is one of those things that makes me angry, because the fact that he was being told to never speak that, never talk about that again. It's almost like hide it, so that the name of our group, stay on high, and then you and your family can suffer the consequences of hiding it, but our group stays, looking good, on the outside. Clearly, that was supposed to be talked about a lot more, and yeah, the healing would have come out of talking more about it. But anyways, what about your mom? Do you have anything to say about her?
Yeah. Mom grew up in Delaware. Interestingly enough, I have old order background on both sides. Dad's first couple years, he would have been raised Weaverland Conference, and mom's dad would have old order Amish background.
Oh wow!
So I'm proud of my old order roots.
Yes.
I think old orders are great. So yeah, she was born in Delaware, also the oldest in her family, and yeah, she was her dad's farm girl. She spent a lot of time out in the fields on the tractor, and I really appreciate that side of my mom. She's little and she's cute, but she sure can get stuff done.
Sure, she sure is a strong, pretty lady for sure.
Yeah, and both my grandpa and grandma on my mom's side came out of very broken homes, and together they did the best with what they knew. But again, it was not an ideal situation to grow up in necessarily on all fronts. So, but yeah, my mom would have. I don't remember how old she was when they joined the Eastern Mennonites. I think she would have been maybe a teenager. They didn't have just a lot of church options in the setting where they were there in Delaware, but they when mom was like 2 or 3, I believe they left the Lancaster conference. It was something conferencey. Not sure if it was Lancaster though, because it was Delaware.
Right.
But they wanted something that was more biblical than what they had, which was that was a very brave decision on my grandpa's part, because he took a route that many of his brothers did not take, and my grandpa's family definitely reaped the blessings of his church choice with that. So yeah, they were on a pretty intense church journey themselves for a number of years. But yeah, ended up in the Eastern Church.
Good. And then you said that was all while you were in Missouri.
So we weren't in Missouri yet.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So at this point, Dad's in Lancaster County.
Yeah.
Mom's in Delaware. And eventually I come on the scene at the very end of the family.
Sure.
Yeah. Mom and Dad, when they got married, they moved to Lancaster County. And I think they did. Yeah, their first couple years were in Lancaster County. At some point, they moved back to Delaware. See, I was not on the scene yet, so I don't know.
Right.
I don't remember the years or anything. And eventually, we ended up in Missouri for, I believe it was 12 years. And I came on the tail end of those 12 years. I was 5 when we moved to Pennsylvania. And interestingly enough, a lot of my happiest childhood memories, and in some ways, some of my most vivid childhood memories, actually are from Missouri and from my first couple years. I just remember the community feel, and people would just randomly stop in, and maybe it's because I was a little kid and I didn't know there were phone calls being made, but it was just a lot more, just more connection at church. I know there was a lot of church stress going on in the last couple years, which influenced my dad's decision to eventually move to Pennsylvania. But I was a little kid enough that I didn't process all of that. All I knew was I had a huge group of friends and cousins, and we lived on this big cattle ranch. And it was great. We had lots of animals.
You said it felt more like Southern culture.
Definitely.
In a way. Yeah, that's why you told me that in the past.
Fast forwarding many, many years. I think I was like 17 or 18 when I experienced a very catastrophic event in my life, which we'll get into later. But I remember talking to my ministry in Pennsylvania and saying, I just never felt like Pennsylvania was home. And they were like, you've lived here so long, it doesn't make any sense. And I was just like, yeah, but I've never found connection here. Like I remember having as a 5-year-old in Missouri. Part of that's probably childhood
Right.
bliss.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I loved Missouri.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was a extremely intense, disconnected child for numerous reasons. I came at the tail end of the family at a very busy time of life for my family and my parents, and I had a very traumatic birth. And back then they didn't have as much training and resources for how to care for a traumatized baby.
Mhm.
I had a lot of I spent a lot of my babyhood in a lot of pain, and was not able to communicate that, obviously. And looking back, my mom feels like I just internalized a lot of that. I became a child that turned inward for comfort, and I fought against everybody and everything.
Mhm.
Um, and I was dubbed a rebellious child from as young as I could remember. That was the word that defined me. Because again, the system doesn't leave room for people who maybe are not neurotypical or have special, um, yeah, brain trauma or whatever it is. If you don't fit in the box, if you you know, you're just you don't fit,
Mhm.
and so you're targeted. And the only tool that my parents were offered for how to handle me was spanking. That was supposed to be the number one biblical way for bringing a child under control. We received so much teaching on breaking the child's will, which I realize now is very damaging. And
Right.
we're not here to break our
For
children.
sure. And I think you said it comes from a set of books or something of teachings on how to
There is plenty of conservative writers out there that
right.
that still teach that.
That
Um,
is something that we can bring names out there for sure because yeah, some of those are
Michael and Debbie Pearl are one of the more modern writers. My parents did not have them back then, but there were other conservative authors that would have taught that, as well as that was the kind of teaching you got over the pulpit at church when you had a child training message. It was spank, 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 spank
mhm.
until the child's cry changes.
Mhm.
So you can tell when a child submits. So
Right.
little girl sitting on the bench at church, I was listening and I'm like, okay, so I'm going to try this out. Because apparently the way I cry is going to influence when mom and dad stop spanking. So yeah, I got a little crafty with that,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't say it necessarily worked all the time.
Yeah.
And I genuinely did need guidance.
Mhm.
But having already um, having already had no blueprint for bonding or connection
Yeah.
from a baby, the spanking was absolutely ineffective, and my poor mom and dad were completely at their wits' end with what to do with me because I didn't respond to
Right.
spanking. Even like 5 times in a row, I remember, like one after the other. They tried so hard with the tools they were given,
Right.
but they just weren't given the right tools.
I think you forgot to mention that you were fighting from day one. Like you said, you had a traumatic birth, but you didn't explain much of what happened there. That you were fighting with the umbilical cord. Yeah.
Right.
How many times you said
Yeah.
it was wrapped? Or?
It was 3 times.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, I was born blue, not breathing, and
Right.
mom
That.
just talks about being amazed at when I actually pinked up and started breathing, at how I was just such an extremely intense baby from that moment on.
Mm-hmm.
It almost scared her, like, what have we got?
Yeah.
Which, yeah.
Yeah. That sounds pretty sad, and um, the fact that you had to like, it's almost like you try to fight for survival.
I think I was stuck in fight or flight from day one,
Yeah.
basically.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, which was no fault of my parents, but
Mm-hmm.
they
And
didn't
then
ask to receive me that way.
yeah, when, again to say like when you mix a child like that with the teachings of another name would have been like is rot and stuff another one that teaches a lot of things that are not very
So
biblical perhaps.
that to me is actually a very scary part of the system, um, because the system is so based on control. When you have your own publishing house on top of that and you get to
Yeah.
control what people read, um, you have a lot of control over the people,
Right.
and you get to brainwash them a lot faster than if you didn't have your own publications.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes,
Yeah.
I still remember the first time we introduced you to a Rod and Staff book.
Yeah, I was quite disturbed and did not want to have any part of even, yeah, reading it. But moving on to your story, you said you were, I think we left that we're still in
Mm,
Missouri, 5
yes.
years old.
And I have so many good memories of growing up with my brothers. Right above me, I have two brothers, and then it's four sisters above that. So I'm the only lucky girl in the family that got to have big brothers. And I'm just amazed at the freedom that we had to go running around in the woods playing Indian. I didn't go with the boys nearly all the time. They would head off by themselves sometimes, and mom would just trust that they would come back, and they usually did. And sometimes she'd have a panic attack because they didn't get back when she thought
On
they
time,
should.
yep.
Yeah. But yeah, just all the rides that my dad would give us on his gator and the cows. Even though the cows were terrifying to little me one time. Well, my dad also raised a whole bunch of pigs. He had like 3 or 4 pig barns, and there was a fairly long lane between, or as I, a little 5-year-old, remember, a fairly long lane between the main house and the pig barns. And in between there was cattle pasture and cattle guards. And I just remember one day going for a walk to find the boys, and I was going to head down to the creek because the creek was yet beyond the pig barns. And somehow or another, I ended up inside the gravity bin wagon. And I just remember being little me in there screaming at the top of my lungs, and the cows were sticking their heads over and sticking their terrifying tongues out at me. Um, and I just knew they were going to eat me alive. And eventually, Dad's hired man heard me screaming in there and came to rescue me. I guess Mom probably just assumed I was just probably taking a nap, and I wandered off. I was crazy like that. One day, I decided to go visit the neighbors because they had a little boy that was about my age. And it was a good hike up to their house. I'm going to say probably over half a mile for a little, probably 3 or 4-year-old at that point. And it was about time for me to take my nap. And I decided I wasn't going to take a nap that day. I was going to head off down the road along the old dirt country road. So I went up to the neighbors, and their good little boy was already having his nap when I got there, which I said, well, my mom said I could come up here, little liar me, but they were just like not sure what to do with me. I think they gave me a cookie, and eventually my mom figured out where I was because she was like, Hannah is nowhere around, and I was standing out in the neighbor's yard, and she could just so see me. So she sent one of my sisters up to get me, and I don't remember that things ended very well for me at that point.
Oh, I'm sure not if you were lying.
Right? Yeah. So anyway, very intense child. And when I was 5, then, yes, we moved to Pennsylvania to a cornfield that my dad turned into a beautiful 40-acre property. He grew a lot of crops. We had 4 big chicken barns, and he built us a beautiful house up on top of the hill. We did not have any close neighbors, and it was a beautiful setting. Everybody that comes up to that house just talks about the view, and
Yeah, it is quite a nice view.
it was like one notch above Lancaster County because you weren't dodging buggies, and there weren't Mennonites everywhere at that point. A lot of Mennonites have moved in, and it's not like Mennonites make a place worse or not, but it's just like the people population back then was just lower than it is now in Pine Grove, Pennsylvania.
Right. Okay.
So Pennsylvania at 5 years old was a really good place to be. I was excited to move, and on this big farm, we had woods, we had animals, dogs, kitties, chickens, cows, random pigs. We had a pet groundhog at one point that we fed a bottle, and he would eat dandelions. He was the cutest little dude, and then eventually I think he died. I don't remember what happened to him.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But I would catch little baby bunnies and try to raise them, and I killed so many bunnies. It's so sad. Just, trying to be nice. I thought I could help them.
Yeah.
And fortunately, maybe 1 or 2 of all the bunnies that I caught actually survived on a very Americanized lettuce and carrot diet. So yeah, I liked Pennsylvania. I did not realize a lot of the stress that was already happening in my family. A lot of us were sick with Lyme's disease. I had Lyme's disease from before I can remember, and I was eventually cured at 16 years of age. But that was just kind of a part of my life. Like Lyme's disease was a very common term in our home, and I just kind of accepted it like children do. This was just part of life. Also, another thing that really had influenced our move to Pennsylvania was the church in Missouri had been undergoing a lot of church stress and conflict, and my dad wanted, he wanted something better. So we moved to Pennsylvania. My dad never considered anything outside of the Eastern Church, because the sort of system that the Eastern Church provided felt very safe to him. After his lifetime of looking for a place to belong and significance and value that was never given to him by his father, being offered a system where you get a list of rules, and if you do the rules, then you're lauded as a great church member, and just really blessed. It feels really good and it feels safe, especially when you have spent so much of your life with your receiving messages from your father that felt like you just weren't ever going to be good enough. And now you found a system where if you do the rules, they tell you you're going to be good, that you are good enough. And that feels safe. That feels good. It feels like spiritual security. My dad he said none of his children are ever going to consider leaving the Eastern Church, because to him that was just the best out there. Mm-hmm. So I know there was some church shopping within the Eastern Church that went on when we moved to Pennsylvania, but I don't remember any of that. I just remember we lived in the Pine Grove Valley, and at some point started going to a church about half an hour away. That particular church promised my dad that he would one day have an Eastern Church local in the valley where we had moved. And that is why he felt really good about putting his membership down at that specific church, because he had received he was promised a church closer someday. Unfortunately, that promise was never seen through. Yeah. And that was very, very hard for my dad. But it wasn't something big enough to change his theology on system for sure. But I remember that just being really hard. Turned 6 years old, started going to school. I had the best first grade teacher. I will always respect and love her for all the time and wisdom she poured into me and teaching me to sit still and not cheat, and she taught me a lot of just emotional regulation. Okay. She was about 50 years old, something like that. And she was just very kind, very predictable. And school was just my happy and safe spot. For the most part, I was very impulsive, and I do remember sitting miserably in my desk with a blindfold tied around my eyes to teach my eyes that we're not supposed to look at other people's papers to get the answers. And to make it worse, we had a visitor. So that was very embarrassing. And another time, I remember that I felt very, very unjustly accused. And I don't even remember what it was for. I just was sure I hadn't done something wrong, and she was sure I had, and I had to miss an art class. And I had to sit in the kitchen and write my name on a piece of paper for the entire art class while all the rest did like a cool weaving project. But it probably made up for all the rest of the times when I should have got punished and didn't, because she was a very gracious teacher. Okay. So first grade was really fun. And then a school started. So that was at a school about 45 minutes away. And then a school started in our valley, just like 10 minutes away. And it was a really tiny school. It started with no more than 20 students, if that. And it was just a very interesting school experience from then on. I would say my younger years, like second and third grade, were pretty good. I had the same teacher then from fourth grade to eighth grade. And those were just really interesting years. Our teacher was what I would call a man of the system. Very, showed very little emotion. Always wore like white button-up shirt with top button closed, black pants, black hat to go out for recess. And just not great with communication. It was, if we did something that maybe he didn't like, we would probably find a little yellow sticky note in our desk the next morning. But yeah, it was really hard to communicate with him, but he was a really good teacher. He taught grades 4 to 8 at the same time. Actually, he at one point he would have taught like grades 4 to 10 at the same time and gotten all the classes in one day. So it really didn't leave a whole lot of extra time for for communicate. I mean, like to actually focus on relationships with the student. Right. So if academics was the sole goal, he did very, very well. And I really respect him for that. Our entire curriculum pretty much would have been Rod and Staff. So that was interesting. Not a terrible curriculum, actually. But there's definitely, it all kind of fits into the way the system grooms you to one day become a part of the system with the language that the curriculum uses. Like, you don't ever call mom and dad. It's always father and mother. And yeah, it just promotes the whole concept of top-down authority, control, that type of thing. But as far as academics, teaching you math and reading and such, I really appreciate the education that I got, even though I was not offered high school beyond that.
Yeah, the what you're saying there with the even the words that they would teach you to use, it tells me, and I've seen it, that is they really strive to have a what do I say, as a group that's very different from the world and even from other Christian groups, perhaps. Like, they wanted to almost basically know, like, when they see you and hear you talk, they know, like, okay, you're one of us. You're one of our group. And yeah.
Yeah, the church group that I was a part of was held up as the best church, like the church that had gotten it the closest to how God originally wanted church to be in comparison to all the rest of the churches. Would they actually come out and say that as strongly as I just said it? Probably not. Because that would sound proud. Right. But that is the kind of like the underlying understanding. I was taught that if somebody asks you, oh, why are you wearing like a head covering, or why are you dressing this way, that you don't say, oh, it's because I believe in Jesus or because I'm a Christian, which for that matter, I wasn't doing it because I was a Christian or believed in Jesus. I was just doing it because of the system. But you're taught to say, I'm a Mennonite, or give it even a little qualifier and say, I'm an Eastern Mennonite. And I literally remember, and this makes me so disgusted at myself, but actually like going on street meetings or meeting people at the store, and they would ask me like, why do you look this way? And I would say, I'm an Eastern Mennonite. And what were they supposed to do with that?
Right.
And it teaches you to identify with a creed or with a cult, a church group, a man-made system,
right,
rather than actually first and foremost with Jesus. Just to actually say, I do this because I am a follower of Jesus and I desire to glorify him in all I do. I wasn't taught that. Anyway, back to school days. The relationship side of school was really hard for me. Interestingly enough, I was actually one of the girls that was probably allowed a bit more freedom in dress than some of the rest. So I experienced a lot of relationship ambivalence, if that makes any sense. I flipped between wanting so hard to fit in and wearing, our school policy and church policy was you have to wear black socks that go the whole way up to your knees, black shoes with no white lettering or any like designs on them. They have to just be completely black. You have to you wear a certain kind of dress with an extra layer on the front, like a cape dress, a certain width of belt, a certain length of skirt. And so I fluctuated, and a certain size of design, like on the dress, nothing was supposed to be no clump of flowers or individual flower was allowed to be bigger than a quarter. So when we went dress fabric shopping, we would literally take quarters out of our purses and hold them onto the fabric. And the whole design was like supposed to be stuck under that. But the really good people took it to the next level and took it to where, you know, if you stand like 10 feet away from me, it should look solid. So solid colors were even more acceptable in some ways, or little teeny weeny designs. I was allowed to wear flowers that were definitely not bigger than a quarter, but were a little bit bigger. And for that, some of the girls at school kind of shunned me somewhat because she's the fancy girl. She, you know, she wears dresses that we wouldn't be allowed to wear, while at the same time kind of envying me. So sometimes I was accepted, sometimes I wasn't, and I struggled between hyper focusing when I went dress shopping with mom on getting like the teeniest tiny little stuff so I could fit in at school and be appreciated and accepted, or just something that I liked, which would have been a flower that was a little bit bigger. And at the same time, mom and I really struggled to agree on what kind of fabric was acceptable to wear. And so, but yeah, it was things like that that made some of my school years really rough. Another thing was my personality that liked to talk and make friends and have fun and imagine things. And I had a pretty colorful personality, and it was looked at with great suspicion. The way I was raised is that women are to be meek and quiet. And what that looks like is you talk in a soft voice. You don't laugh too loud, especially in the presence of boys, because that might draw attention to you from the boys, which is something you don't want because it might make them think wrong thoughts about you. And you don't make eye contact with men. You're not even really supposed to talk to the boys at school, unless it's like in a class environment, or if you're on the playground, you could talk about the game, but like to actually have a conversation, like a normal conversation with a boy, was pretty much unheard of. That would have meant that you liked the boy and that you were flirting.
Right.
And I got in trouble at school, at least once. I got this little yellow paper on my desk, little sticky note from my teacher about how he saw me smiling at this one boy and I was smiling at him too much, and he was concerned there was a relationship developing, and and I was supposed to stop smiling at him. So yeah, it was just very, very hard for me to be accepted because I just couldn't meet the level of meekness and quietness that was acceptable, and it seemed like everybody else, all the other girls at school could. So I internalized a tremendous amount of shame over that, just never being good enough. One time before a school trip, one of the moms at school, whose girls were my friends, very close to the same grade as I was, sent me a fax. So we didn't do email back then. We didn't do text. We had fax machines, and she sent me a fax with a list of guidelines for how I was supposed to behave the next day on the school trip. It said, Hannah will not smile at the boys. Hannah will not talk to the boys. Hannah will laugh quietly. And so my mom got this fax, and she showed it to me, and I cried, maybe not quite all night, but the next morning we took pictures at school, right before we went on the school trip, of our grades. And my face is so swollen from just spending the night. Just once again, I'm not acceptable. Her girls were like the standard for to be accepted. And that particular mom at school also happened to be a fairly good friend of my mom. And so my mom would share with her, her struggles with parenting me. And so I think this other mom felt like she was just going to help my mom out by just giving Hannah a new list of rules for how to behave on the school trip. And that was just an example of something that I struggled with for, almost all my school years, from the time I was like in 4th grade or so until I was like in my upper teens. Which just, I didn't have the right kind of personality to fit into the system that I was required to fit into.
Yeah, you wanted to just feel like with what with your dress and you know how you wanted to talk to people, and you just wanted to connect with who we are. You know, we are creatures of what's it called, like relationships and beauty, and all these things were kind of like holding you back. I remember you even said that um the way you stand or walk was problematic, which to me was one of the I remember, yeah, meeting you. That was something that I was like, man, that's beautiful. You had a posture of a, you know, like almost like a, you know, solid person, not like a person that's hiding who they are, or like you seem secure of yourself, and I guess that was something that was threatening to them. Like she's too,
I,
yeah,
I wasn't easy enough to control, I think.
yeah. Yeah, but even
But even though I
the
tried to be, I wanted to be
right,
acceptable. But
exactly. That's
yeah.
and I hear that and I see that. It's just that when they get to a point of controlling posture, that's you know that's bad.
And that comes later on in my story once I actually like looked like a woman, had developed curves, and
Mm,
that's when everything got so much harder for me.
right.
At least in school, for the most part, I was flat as a pancake, and I didn't have.
Yeah.
I was allowed to run at recess. You know, we weren't allowed to play volleyball. That was part of the specific church group that, or the specific church more or less that I was a part of, was because I think at that school now they do actually play volleyball, but um, jumping around like that would have been immodest, and especially if the boys were watching. It was just such a hyper focus on what are the boys thinking? What are the boys thinking? What are they seeing? And it comes from that whole mindset that women are responsible to keep the men pure.
Mm,
And also the belief that men are just, um, they just have this huge sexual drive that is out of control.
mm,
And it's up to the women to make sure that they are, like they say, doing their part to help the men stay pure. And what ends up happening is that the women get almost 100% of the responsibility.
yeah.
And then when a woman gets abused or taken advantage of, it's like, well, what was she wearing?
Right.
Because she was probably tempting.
Exactly. Yeah. That's just again. That's another. There's so much, but yeah, I feel like for sure the woman has a part to help the man, but like if the woman is not fully responsible for the thoughts of a man for sure. Like I feel like the woman can dress look the most modest a woman can possibly look, and the man can still think like, oh, what's under all that, like, or something. It's not it's not all into how the woman is dressing.
Yeah, the subject of modesty would be one that would be really fun to discuss on here sometime,
Yeah,
because
for sure.
modesty doesn't necessarily mean it's completely covered so much that you don't even look like a woman.
Mm.
I remember in one conversation, so we're getting a little ahead of my story here, but as a teenager I had so many ministers meetings, and in one ministers meeting I just remember just specifically telling my deacon I was not meant to look like a cardboard box. Like, I want to be modest, but I can't look. I don't have corners like a cardboard box. And
Yeah.
my poor deacon wasn't quite sure what to say.
You said that to them.
Well, yeah, because we had
That's
so many
good. That's
meetings
really
about
good.
the way I was walking or the way I was talking,
Yeah.
or something that was wrong with my dress that I had on 3 Sundays ago or something.
Mm.
And I was just like, I'm trying, but I'm sorry, I'm a woman. I don't know how to
Mm.
not look like one.
Right.
Another thing that made school a struggle was the mentality surrounding becoming a Christian, is what we called it. And a lot of the girls had this becoming a Christian experience before I do. And in our culture, in the culture I was raised, what that meant was that you would pray a prayer and you would tell Jesus or tell God, you're sorry for your sins. So you would like tell him you would try to remember the bad things you did, and you would confess them to God, and then Jesus would wash you clean with his blood, and then you got to wear covering. And that covering, the head covering, was sort of a sign of you becoming a woman, becoming an adult. It was a really big deal. And then also, along with that, after you became a Christian and put on a covering, started covering your head, then you had a time of proving in which you would go through a book that the church had published that would just teach you different doctrinal things. Looking back over it now, I'm horrified at some of the false doctrine that was actually in there. But yeah, just basically teaching you things from the Bible, making sure you knew the basic core Bible truths, and also how to be a good church member. There's a couple chapters in that book on church rules and how it's so important and why we need them and so forth. So you would go through this course, and then you would be baptized into the church, which means you're now a church member. And so I was 14 when I had this experience, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But a lot of my friends had gone through that before I had. They had made that decision, so they were wearing coverings, which kind of put them in a category above me, because it meant that they were Christians and I'm not. Mm-hmm. And that was so hard for me because
You felt pressure.
I felt so much pressure, and already I had internalized so much shame. So I was rebellious. Mm-hmm. I believed that from the time I was very young, and I had it confirmed to me over and over again by almost every authority in my life. And I had the wrong personality. I wasn't meek and quiet. And I was full of so much body shame as well, because I had already been mishandled or abused, physically, sexually, and also just the whole sexual thing that I was obviously going through puberty around that time, and that was just so hush hush. Pregnancy, sexuality, all of that was just such a big no talk thing that I wasn't comfortable with myself as a woman. I desperately wanted to be a boy. But I wasn't given that option. And I really, really hated myself. And because, that's the messages I was getting from almost everybody in my life. The culture I was also raised in believes that you shouldn't tell your children that they're beautiful or good looking, because it might make them proud. And so you get a hyper focus on bodies and modesty and persona and personality, and people like me kind of take the brunt of that, because we just don't qualify. We don't fit the box. And I was so confused by the whole becoming a Christian thing, because I heard that God is going to call you, and you will know when God is calling you to become a Christian. And I had so many conversations with my mom about, like, how will I know that God is calling me? And well, it's when you realize that you're a sinner. Well, I'd known my entire life that I was a sinner from as long as I could remember. I had all this shame. And so I was looking for something outside of that. And I just remember praying and praying that, God, would you just call me with a voice? Because I want to know that you're calling me, because I thought I had to wait for God to call me before I could actually, like, have this experience where I could wear a covering and become a church member and be a Christian, because all that was just in one package. I just didn't understand anything about how salvation worked. And I was just told again and again, you will know. You will just know. Well, I never just knew. And it got to be a couple months before I turned 15. And in our culture, if you are 15 and you haven't yet become a Christian, you are in very dangerous ground. It's very embarrassing for your parents, because it makes them look like they're not good parents because they have this child that's not a Christian. And so basically what happened one night was Dad said, "This is the night. You're going to become a Christian tonight." And I was like, "Oh." And I actually, at the time, was really relieved that I didn't have to make that decision, because I had been trying to figure it out on my own for so long, and it just wasn't making sense. So to finally just have somebody tell me, "All right, this is the night you're going to do it," was just like, all right, well, I'm ready for it, because I've been trying to figure it out and it's not making sense. So I'm just going to, this is how the system works.
Right.
It's based on fear. It controls. And control can sometimes feel good. So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so either you're going to become a Christian tonight with just me and Mom, or we're going to call a minister over. Interestingly enough, I actually chose the minister option because I felt like that would make it more valid. I was not at all close to my dad. I was a little closer to my mom at that point. But yeah, I just figured having a minister over would kind of like, I viewed the ministry as my access to God. And so to have the minister over would kind of make it
Mm-hmm.
more real that
Right.
it actually happened. And so a minister came over. I said the prayer. They walked me through it, and they said, "Now you're a Christian." And the relief was just immense. I could not wait to start wearing a covering and finally be accepted and be a Christian. And I
Mm-hmm.
really wanted to do what was right and what Jesus wanted me to do. And I just remember being so happy for the next 2 weeks.
I was gonna say, did that last long? Yeah.
Unfortunately not. But to me, it was just such a big thing because I finally rated. I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I actually did this huge big thing
Right.
that I needed to do to be acceptable. So yeah, I started reading my Bible very faithfully. Really, I had, looking back, I had no concept of love, no concept of Jesus or connection, or even how to be a Christian other than doing all the right things. So I became so focused on just doing everything right. And then when I would mess up, I would feel so horrible. And so I struggled with a very oversensitive conscience for a while because I just wanted so much to be perfect, and it just wasn't working. And did that mean that I actually hadn't become a Christian? And then I heard one of my parents on the phone one day saying, "Yeah, she's the same Hannah she always was, but at least she has the want to now." And that just shattered me because it's like, okay, you just confirmed it. I'm the same person I always was. You're telling me I didn't change, I didn't improve, that now at least I want to, but that I still don't have the power. And the reality was I didn't. I didn't have the power to live a victorious Christian life because I
Right.
had no base for it other
Mm-hmm.
than doing all the things right. So, did I become a Christian? I don't even know how to feel about that because I hadn't met Jesus.
Right.
I met Jesus many, many years later, and that's the part I'm very excited to talk about.
Yeah.
But that started a very hard, confusing journey for me because the shame was still there. The shame about who I was as a person and all my wrong beliefs about myself. And also around this time, my dad started really struggling with mental illness. And it came out in subtle ways at first. Most people didn't have a clue, but to us at home, it was very damaging. I don't really want to go into detail on
Mm.
that because, again, it wasn't my dad being a bad-hearted person
Right.
in the least. It was what happens when your brain has logged as much pain and abuse as my dad's brain did as a
Mm-hmm.
child, and you've never been healed from that. Your brain does give up on you.
Yeah. Never have been given the chance to talk about it.
Yeah.
Instead, no,
Mm-hmm.
just hold it all to yourself.
Mm-hmm. But nobody at church knew. Believe me, we were the model family. Dad raised us very well to look good. And yeah, when things actually fell apart, which I'm getting to eventually, people didn't even believe us because we were just like this outstanding Eastern Mennonite family. We just were such good church supporters. We looked so good, and people just didn't know what to do with that. we kind of helped to set the standard for our church. My sisters wore not just big white church approved head coverings, but they also wore black bonnets over top to come to church in the wintertime because that was supposed to be more conservative. And yeah, we did all the things. So anyway, we'll be getting to that. And yeah, at this point, I also had a lot of friends at church in the youth group. I did struggle with still feeling like I didn't completely fit in, but there was one or two girls that I really was able to connect with. One of them actually was allowed to wear bigger flowers on her dress than me, and that felt really good to have. At least I wasn't the baddest person at church. Unfortunately, this is what the system does. I would say at least half of us, when I actually look back and I remember conversations that we had or scenarios that happened, had experienced sexual abuse by this point. And that's not at all uncommon, unfortunately, in systems like this. And also, very unfortunately, it's usually not addressed. It's met with the same sort of reception that my dad met whenever he tried to share his story with a minister. You just don't talk about it. We can't have the body of Christ dirtied by such stories. And so you just act like it didn't happen. And into all of this plays so strongly the purity culture and broken sexuality, how women are sexual, men have an overwhelming sexual drive, and men are trained from little on up to view women as bodies, and with very, very little sexual education at all. And what you do get is often in the context of shame and it's just so not healthy. And so that just creates a lot of brokenness, and it's a belief that is just ingrained in you from the time you're a baby, basically, up until I remember even going to Bible school. And my bishop's wife, who was the matron at Bible school, had a talk with us girls called a purity talk, in which she said, girls, you will never, ever understand how overwhelming a man's sexual drive is until you are married yourself. And she went on and on to explain how this is just like this fire that is out of control. And all it takes for them to stumble is a girl wearing her sleeves above her elbows, or a dress that's just a little bit too short or too long, or if exposing her ankles or her feet without socks in public. That's all it takes for a man to fall. Unfortunately, this was the same bishop's wife whose husband sat up in front of my church Sunday after Sunday and combed the youth girls up and down with his eyes. and I look back and I wonder, what did she go through to make her believe that this was actually the way it was?
Right. Wow.
And it hurts me to say that. The only reason that it must be said is because it's reality for so many leaders. They're not taught to see women as hearts and individuals, and it just creates so much brokenness.
It makes me think that kind of like what hearing you say all these things and what I said about how what I heard that they started very with good foundations and very biblical. It's just all I'm saying is that they went from a healthy Christian community, right, into a cult. It turned into a cult. There is always a leader or someone to look up to besides Christ, which
and
that shouldn't
cults
be.
are always focused on fear-based control.
Right, a control, and like you said, fear-based, and a ton of rules and regulation.
But it's all a substitute for living out of love.
Right.
We don't believe that love is enough, that a relationship with Jesus is enough to keep you safe.
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
you have to have rules or you aren't going to get to heaven because your heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. And
And we heard that message recently about how, how the sheep know my voice, and my sheep know my voice, and they follow me. Like, sheeps are not meant to be in a what's it called, in a pen. Like, they can just follow the shepherd, and none of them are gonna go wandering. They're gonna stay following the shepherd, and
because they know the shepherd's voice.
yes, they know the shepherd protects them, and is leading them to a green pasture, and they're safe. They don't need to worry about guards or wolves or anything, because he's gonna always be there. But that fear that the leaders have adopted is like, no, we actually, the shepherd's not here. We don't know where he is. We got to put all these guards and guys
It leaves
in
no room for
right.
Jesus' work on the cross.
Yeah, guys in all corners with rifles to shoot the wolf, even though the wolf are actually inside already, devouring the sheep. But wow, it makes me I can see how much of your story is just wrapped around the church. Like, you have been saying your story in junction with the whole system, and
It was the single most defining thing in my life growing up.
yeah, I see that. But yeah, you can continue. I forget where you left off.
Yeah.
After your conversion, no, not conversion, your church conversion, I guess. Yeah. Baptized into the church.
So yeah, I did get through the instruction book with the instruction class after I became a Christian, and came time for baptism. And before baptism, one thing you need to do is you all have a personal interview with the ministry. Every person in the class has a personal interview with the ministry in which you go over the church book of rules and basically promise that this is what you're going to do. You're going to do the rules. You're going to be a good church member. And at one point, as I was going through this, actually it was after I had just come out of my what they call I can't even remember the word, interview. I came out of that, and by the way, this was a terrifying experience to have to actually be in the same room with your ministry. Just you, like, yeah, talk about triggering, because you didn't really know your ministry. They were just they weren't your shepherds. They were your dictators, making sure you did the right thing. And for someone as obsessed with doing the right thing as I was really, really scary, because what if I wasn't quite doing the right thing? So you made sure to wear your most appropriate dress and your blackest socks and most conservative shoes, because your ministry are going to be sitting there looking at you. And then I got out of that, and I was just thinking about some things I had read in that book, and it really sounded to me like I was promising to be a part of this particular church group for the rest of my life. And I went to one of my ministry before I left that night, and I pointed to the sentence that really stuck out to me. I was like, am I promising by being now that I want to go through baptism, is that like promising that I'm never ever going to leave the Eastern Church? And he's like, well, you weren't ever planning to, were you? And I was just like, no, like I didn't have any plans to, but at that point, and I know that was the call of God in my life saying, don't promise.
Yeah.
But I was just like, I don't know what the future holds, and I don't really feel like it's okay for me to promise this. And that was pretty much where the conversation ended. He didn't really say here nor there.
Wow.
So, and then we went through baptism, which the way I was baptized was you kneel at the front of the church. You make vows to God about how you're going to be faithful to him till death. And then the minister pours water on your head 3 times in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then you're a church member. And I just remember being so confused. Like, I wanted to be baptized because being a church member was a good thing. That was kind of like your entrance into the family of God. You weren't really considered to be a part of the family of God, at least in my understanding. I wasn't really in until I got baptized. And my particular church group was the family of God. I was baptized into the Eastern Mennonite Church. But I didn't understand anything about the Holy Spirit and the part that he was playing or not playing in my life at that point. And so that is something that I still struggle with to this day, that I was baptized into a church and not into Christ, not buried with him in baptism, because I didn't understand at all what was happening.
Right.
It was one more thing to do that was a good thing to do, that was going to get you blessing from your fellow church members. And you just were in then, and it just feels really good to be in, especially when you have the kind of history that I've had up till now. So up until this point in my story. So yes, then I was baptized. Then you get to take communion. And so that's a really big deal.
Now I know in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. Now abide faith, hope, and love, these three. The greatest of these is love.